was a cold October night in a small town in rural Texas. The local Walmart, known as the gathering spot for everyone in the area, was nearly empty. Most of the employees had already left, with only a few remaining to close up the store. As the assistant manager, I was in charge of making sure everything was in order before locking the doors. Around 10 p.m., as I was organizing the shelves in the electronics section, I began to feel a strange sensation that I wasn't alone. The silence of the place, which had once been comforting, now felt oppressive. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the toy aisle. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I decided to investigate, thinking it might be a lost customer or an animal that had wandered into the store. As I approached the aisle, I saw something that left me frozen. A porcelain doll, one of those old, creepy ones, was sitting in the middle of the floor. Its eyes seemed to follow me, and its smile was disturbingly realistic. I tried to convince myself it was just a tasteless prank by a coworker, but something inside me knew it wasn't. When I reached out to pick up the doll, the lights in the aisle began to flicker, and a voice whispered my name. It was a soft, feminine voice, but it carried an energy I couldn't explain. I ran back to the checkout area, where two coworkers were finishing up closing the registers. I told them what had happened, but they just laughed, saying I was imagining things. However, when we went to check the toy aisle, the doll had disappeared. The atmosphere in the store had completely changed. The air felt heavier and the silence was almost deafening. We decided to close the store early and leave. As we walked toward the exit, I heard the voice again, this time clearer. "Don't leave yet." The next night, the Walmart was busier than usual. It seemed like everyone in town had decided to shop at the same time. I was busy helping customers, but I couldn't get the incident from the previous night out of my head. The doll, the voice, the feeling that something was wrong, it all haunted me. Around 9 p.m., the store began to empty out. I was in the clothing section, organizing some items, when I heard a noise coming from the appliance aisle. It was the same dragging sound I'd heard the night before. My heart raced, but I decided to face my fear and investigate. When I reached the aisle, I saw the porcelain doll again, but this time it was sitting on top of a refrigerator. Its eyes glowed under the fluorescent light, and its smile seemed even more sinister. Before I could react, the lights began to flicker, and the voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." I tried to move away, but my legs felt stuck to the floor. The doll began to move, its arms and legs creaking as if manipulated by an invisible force. It stood up and took a step toward me. That's when the lights went out completely and I was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the doll had disappeared again. I was trembling, but I knew I had to stay calm. I returned to the checkout area where my coworkers were chatting. I told them what had happened, and this time they seemed to take it seriously. One of them, named Mike, said he'd heard stories about a woman who died in the store many years ago, but he'd never paid much attention to them. We decided to investigate together. We grabbed flashlights and went to the storage room where the store's old records were kept. We found a document from 1985 that mentioned an employee named Clara who had mysteriously disappeared during the night shift. No body was ever found, and the case was never solved. As we read the document, we heard a noise coming from the back of the storage room. It was the sound of slow, dragging footsteps. Mike pointed the flashlight in the direction of the noise. There was Clara, or at least what appeared to be her. Her face was pale and distorted, and her eyes glowed with a supernatural light. She whispered, "You shouldn't have dug into the past." The storage room turned icy, and the air felt charged with a heavy energy. Clara, or whatever she was, began to move toward us. Her steps were slow but deliberate, and each one echoed, like thunder in the silent space. Mike and I backed away, but we soon realized we were cornered. "What does she want?" Mike whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I replied, trying to stay calm. Clara stopped a few feet away from us and extended her hand. In her palm was the porcelain doll, now cracked and with empty eyes. She whispered again, "You need to fix what was broken." It was then that we realized the doll was some kind of key to the mystery. Perhaps Clara was trapped in the store because of it, or maybe the doll represented something that had happened in the past. We decided to take the doll, even though we were afraid of what might happen. As soon as we touched it, a wave of energy hit us and suddenly we were in a flashback. It was 1985, and we saw Clara working at Walmart. She seemed happy, but there was something dark in her eyes. We saw her hiding the doll on a shelf, as if she were trying to protect something. The flashback shifted, and now we saw Clara being confronted by a man who appeared to be the store manager at the time. They were arguing, and the man seemed to be threatening her. Clara tried to run, but he grabbed her and dragged her into the storage room. That's when we understood. Clara had been murdered, and her body had been hidden in the store. The flashback ended, and we were back in the present. Clara stood before us, but now her face seemed calmer. She whispered, "Find what he hid." Mike and I knew what we had to do. We began tearing apart the storage room, searching for anything that could be Clara's remains. After hours of searching, we found an old box buried under some shelves. Inside were Clara's remains, along with a photo of her holding the doll. We placed the remains in a dignified spot and burned the doll as a ritual to free her soul. As the flames consumed the doll, we felt a wave of relief, and Clara disappeared, finally at peace. The Walmart was never the same after that night. Mike and I grew closer, sharing the weight of what we'd experienced. The store continued to operate, but there was always a strange feeling in the air, as if Clara was still there, watching. In the days following the incident, the Walmart seemed quieter than ever. Employees whispered among themselves, and some even requested transfers to other stores. Mike and I decided to keep what happened a secret, knowing no one would believe us. However, small phenomena continued to occur. Lights flickered randomly, objects disappeared and reappeared in strange places, and sometimes in the silence of the night, Clara's whisper could still be heard. Despite it all, we felt she was no longer trapped, but rather watching, as if she wanted to ensure her story would never be forgotten. One night, as I was closing the store, I found a letter in my locker. It was written in an old-fashioned handwriting and said, "Thank you for freeing me. Now, protect what remains of me." The letter was signed with a stylized C. I kept the letter as a memento but never told anyone about it. Mike and I began to investigate more about Clara. We discovered she was a young single mother who worked at Walmart to support her daughter. Her daughter Emily had disappeared shortly after Clara's death, and no one knew what had happened to her. We felt that perhaps Clara was still searching for her daughter, even in death. We decided to look for clues about Emily. After weeks of research, we found an old orphanage where she might have been taken. There we learned that Emily had been adopted by a family that moved to another state. Unfortunately, she had passed away a few years earlier from an illness. When we returned to Walmart, we felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air felt lighter, and the supernatural phenomena stopped completely. It was as if Clara had finally found the peace she was looking for, knowing her daughter was no longer alone in the world. Mike and I continued working at the store for a few more months, but eventually, we went our separate ways. I moved to another city, while Mike started his own business. However, whenever we met, we reminisced about those nights at Walmart and what we'd learned about the power of forgiveness and redemption. The Walmart is still there, operating as usual, but I know Clara is still watching, not as a scary ghost, but as a protective spirit. Her story is a reminder that the past is never completely forgotten, and that sometimes we need to face our fears to find peace. Years have passed since the events at Walmart, but Clara's story has never left my mind. I decided to write a book about the experience, blending real facts with fiction to protect the identities of those involved. The book became a local success, and many people began visiting Walmart, curious to learn more about the legend of Clara. One day I received a letter from a woman named Sarah. She claimed to be Clara's granddaughter and wanted to know more about the grandmother she'd never met. I was moved by her message and agreed to meet her. Sarah was a vibrant young woman, with the same bright eyes Clara had in the photos we'd found. She told me her mother, Emily, had passed away when she was very young but always spoke fondly of Clara. Sarah wanted to know everything I knew about her grandmother, from the details of her life to what had happened that night at Walmart. We spent hours talking, and I shared everything I'd experienced. Sarah was amazed but also grateful to finally understand what had happened to Clara. She thanked me for helping to free her grandmother's soul and for keeping her story alive. Together, we decided to create a memorial for Clara at Walmart. The store's management, now under new leadership, agreed to dedicate a small plaque. In her honor, the plaque read, "In memory of Clara, a mother, a friend, and a protective spirit." On the day of the memorial's unveiling, Sarah and I were there, along with Mike and some former employees who had lived through the events. It was an emotional moment, and we felt Clara had finally found the rest she deserved. Since then, Walmart has had no more supernatural incidents. The store continues to operate normally, but Clara's story remains an important part of its history. For me, that experience was a lesson in the power of compassion, courage, and the importance of facing the past to move forward. Sarah and I keep in touch to this day, and she regularly thanks me for helping bring peace to her family. Clara may be gone, but her legacy lives on, not just at Walmart, but in the hearts of everyone who knew her story. Even after the memorial and the apparent closure of the chapter, something still felt incomplete. Sarah and I continued to correspond, and she told me about recurring dreams she had of Clara. In the dreams, Clara always whispered the same phrase, "There's still something that needs to be found." Intrigued, we decided to return to Walmart for one final investigation. This time, we weren't alone. Mike, who had retired, joined us, as did a friend of Sarah's who specialized in the paranormal. We arrived at the store at night, with the management's permission. They still remembered Clara's story. We started in the storage room where it had all begun. We used recording equipment and energy detectors, hoping to capture some sign of Clara. For hours, nothing happened. We were about to give up when we heard a noise coming from the toy section. It was the same dragging sound I'd heard that first night. We ran there and found a small wooden box hidden behind a shelf. Inside the box was a diary. It was Clara's, and in it, she detailed her life, her fears, and her hopes. In the last pages, she wrote about a treasure she'd hidden for her daughter, Emily, in case something happened to her. It was a small collection of jewelry and a love letter Clara had never had the chance to deliver. Sarah was emotional as she read her grandmother's words. She held the jewelry and the letter as if they were the greatest treasures in the world. That's when we felt a gentle breeze pass through us, and we heard Clara's whisper one last time, "Thank you, now I am complete." In that moment, we knew Clara had finally found the peace she'd been searching for. She was no longer trapped at Walmart, but free to move on. Sarah decided to donate some of the jewelry to a charity in Clara's name, keeping only the letter as a personal memento. The diary was published as a companion to my book, and Clara's story became even more widely known. Walmart continues to operate, but now it's a place of memory and respect. The plaque in Clara's honor was expanded, and many visitors leave flowers and messages in her memory. For me, this journey was proof that the past is never truly lost. It can haunt us, but it can also teach and guide us. Clara wasn't just a ghost. She was a woman, a mother, and a story that needed to be told. And so the cycle closed. Clara rested, Sarah found peace, and I learned that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones that connect us to one another.